A millionaire agrees to an arranged marriage. He believed his mysterious bride was ugly. On the wedding day, when he lifted her veil, everyone got chills. She was much more than they thought. Before we start this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The Cathedral of St. Peter gleamed in the afternoon sun, its Gothic towers casting long shadows over the square, crowded with photographers and onlookers. The buzz of the crowd was almost palpable, everyone eager to catch a glimpse of the couple. Of the moment, Alexander Thornton, the billionaire heir to the Thornton Empire, and his mysterious bride, Olivia Ramirez. Inside the church, the atmosphere was equally electrifying. The cream of American society occupied the polished wooden pews, whispering speculations about the bride that no one knew. Alexander, impeccable in his Armani tuxedo, waited at the altar with an impassive expression that hid a mixture of boredom and resignation. At 35, Alexander was the most coveted businessman in the country. Tall, athletic, with piercing green eyes, he could have any woman he desired. Yet here he was, about to marry a complete stranger, all in the name of family business. "Remember, my son," the voice of his grandmother, Mrs. Constance Thornton, echoed in his mind. "This marriage is vital to solidify our alliance with the Ramirez family. No matter what she's like, play your part." Alexander suppressed a sigh. The rumors about Olivia's appearance were discouraging, to say the least. A plain girl, devoid of any charm, were some of the kinder comments he'd heard in social circles. Why bother getting to know her beforehand? Better to just get it over with. The cathedral doors opened, and an expectant silence fell over the gathering. The wedding march began to play, and all eyes turned to the entrance. It was then that she appeared. The first sight of Olivia Ramirez took Alexander's breath away, but not for the reasons he expected. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of lace and silk, hugged a figure that defied the deprecating descriptions. She moved with feline grace, each step measured and confident. A thick veil covered her face, but the proud posture and raised shoulders told a very different story from the plain bride everyone expected. Alexander felt his heart race, a mixture of surprise and suspicion forming in his chest. Who was this woman? Why did she allow everyone to believe she was uninteresting? And more importantly, why did she accept this marriage with such confidence? When Olivia finally reached the altar, Alexander extended his hand mechanically. He could feel the warmth of her skin even through the lace glove, an unexpected electricity running up his arm. The priest began the ceremony, but Alexander barely heard the words. His eyes were fixed on the veil, trying to decipher the mystery behind it. Finally, the moment arrived. "You may lift the bride's veil," announced the priest. With slightly trembling hands, Alexander raised the delicate fabric. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Olivia Ramirez was stunningly beautiful. Almond-shaped, expressive, honey-colored eyes stared at Alexander with a mixture of amusement and challenge. Her golden skin seemed to glow under the cathedral lights, and full, lips curved into an enigmatic smile. It was as if all the previous descriptions had been an elaborate hoax. A murmur ran through the church. Alexander clearly heard someone whisper, "My God, she's gorgeous." He silently agreed, still stunned by the revelation. "Alexander Thornton, do you take Olivia Ramirez as your lawful wife?" The priest's voice brought him back to reality. "I do," he answered automatically, his voice hoarser than he would have liked. "Olivia Ramirez, do you take Alexander Thornton as your lawful husband?" "I do," Olivia replied, her melodious and firm voice showing no trace of hesitation. They exchanged rings, their fingers briefly touching, sending shivers down Alexander's spine. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Olivia leaned in for the kiss with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Their lips met, and Alexander felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The kiss was brief, but intense enough to leave him dazed. When they parted, Olivia's smile had a touch of triumph that intrigued him even more. They left the church under a shower of rice and camera flashes. In the car that would take them to the reception, Alexander finally found his voice. "Why?" was all he managed to ask. Olivia turned to him, her eyes shining with sharp intelligence. "Why what, dear husband? Why did I accept this marriage?" Or why did I allow everyone to believe I was... What did they say again? Ah yes, plain? Her voice had a tone of amusement that irritated Alexander. Both, he replied dryly. Everything has its time and place, Alexander, she answered enigmatically. But don't worry, you'll find out soon. After all, we have a lifetime ahead of us, don't we? The rest of the journey was made in silence, but Alexander couldn't take his eyes off his new wife. She looked out the window, apparently absorbed in the passing landscape, but he could see the slight smile playing on her lips. At the reception, held in the gardens of the Thornton mansion, Olivia circulated among the guests with grace and charm that left everyone enchanted. She laughed at politicians' jokes, discussed art with knowledge, and asked insightful questions about business. That impressed even the most experienced entrepreneurs. Alexander observed everything from afar, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. He felt as if he had completely lost control of the situation. Who was Olivia Ramirez really? And what did she want? Mrs. Constance approached, her astute eyes assessing the scene. It seems we underestimated Miss Ramirez, she murmured. Or, rather, Mrs. Thornton now. Did you know about this? Alexander asked, unable to hide the accusation in his voice. Of course not, Mrs. Constance replied, a slight frown betraying her own surprise. But perhaps this is interesting. Alexander wasn't sure if interesting was the word he would use. Intriguing, certainly. Potentially dangerous, perhaps. As the party continued into the night, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he had entered a game whose rules he didn't know. Olivia was clearly more than just a piece on the corporate chessboard of his family. She had her own agenda, her own plans. And he, Alexander Thornton, the man who had always been in control, now found himself in unknown territory. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. When the last dance was announced, Olivia appeared at his side as if she had materialized out of thin air. "Shall we show them how it's done, husband?" she whispered, her eyes shining with a veiled challenge. Alexander hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand. As he led her to the dance floor, he realized that, for the first time in years, he was genuinely curious about what the future held. The music began, a slow and sensual waltz. Their bodies drew close, and Alexander felt that electricity between them again. As they twirled around the dance floor, the eyes of all the guests fixed on them, he leaned in and whispered in Olivia's ear, "You may have surprised me today, but don't think you've won the game. It's barely begun." Olivia laughed softly, her warm breath against his neck. "Oh, darling," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to win a game. I'm here to change the rules." And with those enigmatic words, the music came to an end. They parted, applause echoing around them, but Alexander's eyes remained fixed on Olivia. He had the distinct feeling that he had just signed a contract whose clauses he still didn't know. As the guests began to say their goodbyes, Alexander couldn't help but think that his arranged marriage had turned into something much more complex and potentially dangerous than he had ever imagined. Olivia Ramirez, no, Olivia Thornton now, was a force to be reckoned with, and he would need all his cunning to navigate the turbulent waters that were surely to come. The night was coming to an end, but the real story was just beginning, and Alexander Thornton, for the first time in a long time, had no idea what awaited him. The sun had barely risen when Alexander woke up, feeling disoriented for a moment. The events of the previous night came back in a flood of memories. The wedding, the surprising revelation, the party, and Olivia. He turned in bed, expecting to find her sleeping beside him, but the space was empty and cold. Intrigued, Alexander got up and put on a silk robe. The bridal suite of the Thornton mansion was a labyrinth of luxurious rooms, and he began to search. Ever his enigmatic wife. He found her on the balcony, already dressed in an elegant pantsuit, her hair impeccably arranged, as if she were ready for a business meeting. "Good morning, husband," Olivia greeted him without turning around, her eyes fixed on the landscape of the gardens below. "Did you sleep well?" Alexander hesitated, studying her profile. "As well as possible, considering the circumstances," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Are you going out?" Olivia finally turned to face him, an enigmatic smile on her lips. Actually, we are. Did you forget we have a breakfast with the board of Thornton Corp? Your grandmother made a point of reminding us last night. Alexander frowned. He had completely forgotten. Of course, breakfast, he said, trying to sound confident. I'll be ready in 15 minutes. Take your time, Olivia replied, her tone soft but with a hint of amusement. After all, we need to make a memorable entrance, don't we? As he got ready, Alexander couldn't help but think about how Olivia always seemed to be one step ahead. It was disconcerting and, at the same time, intriguing. He finished dressing and found Olivia waiting for him in the hall. The journey to the Thornton Corp headquarters was made in tense silence. Alexander observed Olivia out of the corner of his eye, trying to decipher her thoughts. She seemed perfectly at ease, as if she were going to just another normal day at work, and not her first official appearance as the new Mrs. Thornton. When they arrived at the imposing glass and steel building that housed the Thornton Empire, they were greeted by a wave of flashes. Reporters shouted questions, eager for details about the wedding and the mysterious bride. Alexander instinctively placed his hand on Olivia's back, guiding her through the crowd. To his surprise, Olivia handled the situation with mastery. She smiled and waved graciously, occasionally answering a question with charm and intelligence. When a reporter asked about the rumors of her appearance before the wedding, she laughed softly. Appearances can be deceiving, Olivia replied with an enigmatic smile. But what really matters is what we have to offer beyond them, don't you agree? Alexander was impressed by her ability to deflect the question without really answering it. He was beginning to understand that his wife was much more than a simple piece in his family's corporate chess game. In the elevator on the way to the meeting room, Alexander finally broke the silence. "So you seem quite familiar with the press," he commented, trying to sound casual. Olivia glanced at him sidelong, a slight smile playing on her lips. "There are many things about me that you still don't know, Alexander, but don't worry, we'll have time to discover everything about each other." Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened, revealing the executive floor of Thornton Corp. Mrs. Constance was waiting for them, her astute gaze assessing the couple. "Welcome," she said, her tone formal, but with a gleam of approval in her eyes. "We're all eager to get to know the newest member of the Thornton family better." Olivia smiled, leaning in to kiss Mrs. Constance's cheeks. "It's an honor to be part of such an illustrious family," she responded graciously. "I can't wait to contribute to the Thornton legacy." Alexander observed the interaction with a mixture of admiration and distrust. Olivia seemed perfectly at ease in the role of new heiress, as if she had been born for it, but he couldn't help but wonder what her true intentions were. The meeting room was full of familiar faces, the most influential members of the Thornton Corp board. Everyone stood up when the couple entered, curious looks fixed on Olivia. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice firm and controlled, "allow me to officially introduce my wife, Olivia Thornton." Olivia stepped forward, her radiant smile, but her astute eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," she said, her melodious voice filling the room. "I hope we can work together to take Thornton Corp to new heights of success." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Alexander noticed that several directors seemed impressed, perhaps even a little intimidated. Olivia wasn't just beautiful. She exuded an aura of confidence and intelligence that was impossible to ignore. The breakfast proceeded with Olivia at the center of attention. She asked insightful questions about the different sectors of the company, demonstrating a surprising knowledge of the financial market and the latest technological trends. Alexander observed, divided between admiration and a growing sense of unease. At one point, the company's CFO, a middle-aged man named Robert, asked a question about Thornton Corp's recent acquisition of a technology startup. "If I may," Olivia intervened before Alexander could respond, "I believe that acquisition was a brilliant strategic move. The technology developed by that startup has the potential to revolutionize our sustainable energy division, not only improving our efficiency, but also positioning us as leaders in green innovation." Robert blinked, visibly surprised. "Exactly," he agreed, casting an impressed look at Alexander. "That's precisely the vision we had when making the acquisition." Alexander felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Olivia wasn't just keeping up with the conversation, she was dominating it. Each response, each observation she made demonstrated a deep understanding of the Thornton family business. But how and why? At the end of the meeting, it was clear that Olivia had won the board's approval. The executives said goodbye with warm smiles and handshakes, many expressing their excitement to work with her in the future. When they were finally alone, Alexander turned to Olivia, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "How did you know all that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of admiration and suspicion. "About the company, the acquisitions, our strategies." Olivia smiled, that same enigmatic smile that had intrigued him since the moment he lifted her veil in the church. "Do you really think I would enter this marriage without doing my homework, Alexander?" she replied, her voice soft, but with a hint of challenge. "Knowledge is power, and I intend to be much more than just a billionaire's decorative wife." Alexander studied her for a long moment, feeling as if he was seeing Olivia for the first time. She wasn't just beautiful and intelligent, she was ambitious, strategic, and potentially dangerous. "What do you really want, Olivia?" he finally asked, his voice low and intense. Olivia took a step towards him, coming so close that he could feel the heat of her body. Their eyes met, and for a moment Alexander saw something in them. Determination, perhaps, or something deeper and more complex. "What I want, Alexander," she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, "is much more than you can imagine. But don't worry, you'll find out in time." With those words, she stepped away, leaving Alexander with more questions than answers. As he watched her walk towards the elevator, he couldn't help but think that his arranged marriage had turned into something much more complex and potentially dangerous than he had ever imagined. Olivia Thornton was an enigma, a puzzle he was determined to solve. But as the pieces began to fit together, Alexander had the unsettling feeling that the final image might be something he wasn't prepared to face. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than he could ever have predicted. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of social events, business meetings, and public appearances. Alexander and Olivia moved through high society circles like a perfectly synchronized couple, their performances so impeccable that even the most skeptical began to believe in the authenticity of their relationship. But behind the closed doors of the Thornton mansion, the reality was quite different. Alexander and Olivia were two players on a complex board, each trying to decipher the other's moves without revealing their own cards. On a particularly tense evening, after a charity dinner where Olivia had once again shone, Alexander confronted her in the mansion's study. "Who are you really, Olivia?" he asked, his voice laden with frustration. "Weeks have passed, and I feel like I know nothing about you beyond what everyone sees." Olivia, who had her back to him, observing the night through the window, turned slowly. Her face, normally a mask of serenity, showed a shadow of sadness, anger. Alexander couldn't decipher it. "Perhaps the question you should be asking, Alexander, is who are the Ramirez family?" she replied, her voice low and intense. "Have you never wondered why our families, despite being so powerful, never crossed paths before?" Alexander frowned, caught off guard by the question. "I assumed it was because the Ramirez family operated in a different market sector," he replied, uncertain. Olivia let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, Alexander," she said, shaking her head, "there's so much you don't know, so much that your precious grandmother has hidden from you." She walked to a bookshelf, pulling out an old volume. It was a scrapbook of newspaper clippings. Olivia opened it and handed it to Alexander. "Read," she ordered softly. Alexander looked at the page yellowed by time. It was a newspaper article dated 25 years ago. The headline screamed, "Ramirez Empire Crumbles in Financial Scandal." His eyes scanned the text, absorbing the details of a story he had never heard before. The article spoke about how Ramirez Investments, one of the country's largest brokerage firms at the time, had been accused of large-scale fraud. The family patriarch, Gabriel Ramirez, was portrayed as the architect of a Ponzi scheme that ruined thousands of investors. "My father Olivia said softly, watching Alexander's reaction, was innocent. He was used as a scapegoat by much more powerful people, people who wanted total control of the financial market. Alexander looked up from the article, understanding beginning to form in his mind. Are you suggesting that your grandmother, the great Constance Thornton, was behind the fall of the Ramirez family? Olivia completed, her eyes shining, with a mixture of pain and determination. I'm not suggesting, Alexander. I'm stating it. She took the scrapbook from his hands, turning a few pages until she came to another clipping. This one showed a photo of Constance Thornton, much younger, shaking hands with a man Alexander recognized as the then chairman of the Federal Reserve. Your grandmother used her political connections to manipulate the investigations, Olivia explained. She planted evidence, bought witnesses, did whatever was necessary to ensure that my father was convicted and that Thornton Corp could absorb Ramirez Investments' assets for a fraction of their real value. Alexander felt as if the floor was opening up beneath his feet. He had always known that his grandmother was a ruthless businesswoman, but this was another level of cruelty. Why are you telling me this now? He asked, his voice hoarse. Olivia moved closer, her eyes fixed on his. Because you need to understand what's at stake, Alexander. This marriage, this alliance between our families, isn't just about uniting fortunes or expanding empires. It's about justice. It's about correcting the mistakes of the past. Alexander felt a shiver run down his spine. And what's your role in all of this, Olivia? Revenge? She smiled, but there was no joy in her eyes. Revenge is a dish best served cold, they say, but what I seek is more than that. I want the truth revealed. I want my father's name cleared, and I want the real culprits to pay for their crimes. And me? Alexander asked, dreading the answer. Where do I fit into this plan of yours? Olivia moved even closer, placing a hand on his face. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. You, Alexander, she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, are the key to all of this. You have the power to change the Thornton legacy, to transform an empire built on lies into something truly noble. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of these revelations. When he opened them again, he saw Olivia watching him intently, as if she could read every thought passing through his mind. And if I refuse to participate in this? He asked, his voice low and tense. Olivia took a step back, her face assuming again that mask of serenity he knew so well. Then, my dear husband, we will be on opposite sides of this war. And believe me, it's a war I intend to win, with or without you. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken implications. Alexander felt as if he were on the edge of a precipice, knowing that his next decision would change the course of his life forever. I need time, he finally said. Time to process all of this, to investigate on my own. Olivia nodded, a slight smile playing on her lips. Time is something I can give you, Alexander. After all, I've planned this for years. A few days won't make a difference. She turned to leave the study but stopped at the door, looking over her shoulder. But don't take too long. The clock is ticking and there's a lot at stake. With those words she left, leaving Alexander alone with his turbulent thoughts. He sank into a leather armchair, the scrapbook still in his hands. As he flipped through the pages, reviewing the story of a destroyed family and an empire built on its ruins, Alexander couldn't help but wonder what kind of game he had gotten himself into, and more importantly, what would be his next move. The night wore on, and in the Thornton mansion, two players prepared for the next round of a game whose rules were constantly changing. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and the fate of two powerful families hung in the balance. Alexander knew he needed to be careful. Every step from here on out would be crucial. He needed to uncover the truth behind Olivia's accusations, but also protect his family's legacy. And in the midst of all this, there was the question of his conflicting feelings for his enigmatic wife. As the mansion's clock struck midnight, Alexander made his decision. He would get to the bottom of this story no matter the cost. The truth, whatever it might be, needed to come to light. With renewed determination, he began to plan his next steps. The game was just beginning, and Alexander Thornton was determined not to be just another piece on someone else's board. The days that followed Olivia's revelation were a whirlwind for Alexander. During the day, he maintained the facade of a devoted husband and competent heir. At night, he transformed into an amateur detective, scouring the Thornton family archives in search of any evidence that could corroborate or refute his wife's accusations. Olivia, for her part, seemed to observe him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, as if she were evaluating his every move. Their interactions were cordial, but laden with an underlying tension that didn't go unnoticed by the mansion's staff. On a particularly frustrating afternoon, after hours of fruitlessly rifling through old documents, Alexander decided to approach the only person who could have direct answers, his grandmother, Mrs. Constance. He found her in the mansion's winter garden, tending to her rare orchids with the same meticulous precision she applied to business. "Grandma," Alexander began, trying to keep his voice calm, "I need to ask you some questions. About the past, about the Ramirez family." Mrs. Constance froze for a moment, her hands still delicately holding a flower. Slowly, she turned to face him, her astute eyes assessing her grandson's expression. "So she finally told you," the matriarch said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I wondered how long it would take." Alexander felt his heart race. "Then it's true? What Olivia said about the fall of the Ramirez family, about our family's involvement?" Mrs. Constance sighed, indicating a nearby bench. When they were both seated, she began to speak, her voice low and intense. "The business world is a jungle. Alexander, sometimes to survive you need to be the predator, not the prey. The Ramirez family was a threat to our empire. They were expanding rapidly, acquiring companies we coveted. But to ruin them, destroy an entire family?" Alexander questioned, incredulous. "I did what was necessary to protect the Thornton legacy," Mrs. Constance replied, without a trace of remorse in her voice. "Gabriel Ramirez was weak. He hesitated to make the tough decisions. I merely gave a little push for the house of cards to collapse." Alexander felt a wave of nausea. "And the fraud accusations? The planted evidence?" Mrs. Constance shrugged as if discussing the weather. "Business is business, my dear. Gabriel had his own skeletons in the closet. I just exposed them in a way that benefited us." "My God," Alexander murmured, running a hand through his hair. Olivia was right all along. At the mention of her daughter-in-law's name, Mrs. Constance's eyes narrowed. "That girl is smarter than we thought. She planned all this, didn't she? The marriage, the alliance, and all part of some elaborate revenge plan." Alexander hesitated, not wanting to reveal more than necessary. "She wants justice, Grandma. For her father, for her family." Mrs. Constance let out a bitter laugh. "Justice in our world? Oh, my dear grandson, you still have much to learn." She stood up, smoothing out the non-existent wrinkles in her impeccable dress. "Now that you know the truth, what do you intend to do, Alexander?" It was the question that had been tormenting him for days. Alexander took a deep breath before answering, I don't know, but I can't simply ignore what happened." Mrs. Constance studied him for a long moment, her cold eyes calculating, something Alexander couldn't decipher. "Be careful, my dear. The path you choose now may determine not just your future, but the future of the entire Thornton family." With those enigmatic words, she walked away, leaving Alexander alone with his tumultuous thoughts. That night, as they dined in tense silence, Alexander finally addressed Olivia. "You were right," he said simply, "about everything." Olivia set down her fork, her eyes meeting his. "And now?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hope and apprehension. Alexander took a deep breath. "Now, we plan the next move. Together." A slight smile formed on Olivia's lips, the first genuine smile Alexander had seen since their wedding day. "Together," she repeated, reaching her hand across the table. Alexander hesitated for a moment before intertwining his fingers with hers. The touch was electric, charged with unspoken promises and unexplored possibilities. In the days that followed, the Thornton couple transformed into a relentless investigation team. Olivia shared years of meticulous research, documents she had secretly collected, witnesses who were willing to speak. Alexander, in turn, used his connections within the company to access files that had been out of his reach until then. Each new discovery was like a piece of a macabre puzzle, revealing the extent of the conspiracy that had destroyed the Ramirez family. But as they delved deeper into the investigation, Alexander began to realize that the problem was much bigger than just his family. The web of corruption extended to influential politicians, judges, even figures in the upper echelons of government. "This is bigger than we imagined," Alexander said one night as they reviewed documents in the study. "If we expose all of this, it won't just be my grandmother who falls. We could destabilize the entire system." Olivia observed him over a stack of papers, her eyes shining with fierce intensity. "And does that scare you?" Alexander reflected for a moment before answering. "No," he said finally. "It makes me realize how important what we're doing is. It's not just about revenge or justice for your family. It's about correcting a system that's rotten to the core." Olivia smiled, a smile that was both proud and a little sad. "You're starting to understand, Alexander. This is the legacy we can build together, a legacy of truth and integrity." At that moment, looking at his wife, this woman he had so drastically underestimated at the beginning, Alexander felt something change within him. It wasn't just admiration or respect. It was something deeper, more powerful. He stood up from his chair and walked over to Olivia, pulling her into a tight embrace. She seemed surprised for a moment, but soon relaxed in his arms. "Thank you," Alexander murmured against her hair, "for showing me the truth, for giving me the chance to do the right thing." Olivia pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Don't thank me yet," she said softly. "The path ahead of us is dangerous. We have powerful enemies, Alexander, and they won't hesitate to destroy us if they discover what we know." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Then we'll be careful, meticulous. We won't give them any chance to catch us off guard." "And if we have to sacrifice everything?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Thornton Empire, your fortune, your status?" "Then so be it," Alexander replied firmly. "Some things are more important than money or power." Olivia studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him for the first time. Then slowly she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of unbridled passion, but of mutual understanding, of a connection that went beyond words. When they parted, both knew that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer just allies in a mission for justice. They were partners, in the truest sense of the word. "Tomorrow," Alexander said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "we start planning our offensive. It's time to bring the truth to light." Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "The end game begins." As the night wore on, the Thornton couple remained in the study, planning and strategizing. They knew that the days ahead would be the most challenging of their lives. But now, united by a common purpose and a growing bond, they were ready to face any obstacle. The board was about to be overturned, and Alexander and Olivia were determined to be the winners of this dangerous game. The following weeks were a whirlwind of frantic activity for Alexander and Olivia. During the day, they maintained their impeccable public appearances, the perfect couple, heirs to the Thornton Empire. At night, they transformed into tireless detectives, weaving a complex web of evidence and alliances. The plan they developed was audacious and risky. They knew they would face not just Mrs. Constance, but an entire network of powerful individuals who benefited from the corrupt status quo. "We need allies," Olivia said one night as they reviewed their strategies. "People willing to risk everything for the truth." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I have some contacts in the press who could be useful, and there's a prosecutor, James Carter, who's always been known for his integrity. He could be our entry point into the judicial system." Olivia smiled, approving the idea. "Excellent. I have some connections with civil rights groups and anti-corruption organizations. They can help us mobilize public opinion when it's time to act. As the days passed, Alexander and Olivia carefully built their support network. Secret meetings were held in unlikely locations, documents exchanged in coded messages, and slowly, a coalition for justice began to take shape. However, maintaining appearances became increasingly challenging. Mrs. Constance, ever astute, began to suspect that something was amiss. "You two have been very busy lately," she commented during a family dinner, her perceptive eyes studying the couple. "Any special project in the works?" Alexander and Olivia exchanged a quick glance before he responded with a rehearsed smile. "Actually, yes, Grandma. Olivia has had some brilliant ideas for expanding our green technology division. We've been working on a business plan." Mrs. Constance arched an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "I see. I hope you'll keep me informed about this project." "Of course, Mrs. Thornton," Olivia replied smoothly. "After all, your experience is invaluable to us." The dinner proceeded in tense silence, and both Alexander and Olivia knew that time was running out. They needed to act before Mrs. Constance uncovered their plans. The following week, the couple decided to take the first public step in their campaign for truth. They organized a press conference announcing the creation of a new foundation dedicated to corporate transparency and social responsibility. "The New Tomorrow Foundation will be a beacon of integrity in the business world," Alexander declared, his voice firm and confident in front of the cameras. "We believe it's time for large corporations to be accountable for their actions and work for the common good." Olivia, at his side, added, "Our first project will be a complete and transparent audit of the business practices of the country's largest companies, starting with Thornton Corp itself." The bomb had been dropped. The reactions were immediate and intense. While many applauded the initiative, others, especially those with something to hide, reacted with barely disguised hostility. Mrs. Constance watched the press conference on television, her face a mask of contained fury. As soon as the cameras turned off, she picked up the phone, her fingers dialing a number she rarely used. "We have a problem," she said to the person on the other end of the line. "It's time to implement the contingency plan." Meanwhile, back at the Thornton mansion, Alexander and Olivia were celebrating their first successful step. "It was brilliant," Alexander said, embracing Olivia enthusiastically. "Did you see their faces? They're panicking." Olivia smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "This was just the beginning, Alexander. The real battle is yet to come." As if to confirm her words, Alexander's phone rang. It was James Carter, the prosecutor they had trusted. "Alexander," James's voice sounded urgent. "You've opened a Pandora's box. I'm receiving reports of suspicious movements in several companies. It seems they're trying to hide evidence." Alexander exchanged a worried look with Olivia. "I understand, James. Keep us informed. And please, be careful." They had barely hung up when Olivia's cell phone vibrated with a message. Her face paled as she read the content. "What is it?" Alexander asked, alarmed. "It's from my contact at the bank," Olivia replied, her voice trembling. "Someone is trying to freeze our accounts, all of them." Alexander felt a chill down his spine. "My grandmother," he murmured. "She's counter-attacking." Olivia nodded, her determination quickly returning. "We need to act fast. Transfer as much funds as possible to secure accounts. Alert our allies." The following hours were a whirlwind of frantic activity. Alexander and Olivia worked tirelessly, moving resources, securing evidence, strengthening their defenses. At midnight, exhausted but resolute, they finally allowed themselves a moment of pause. "Do you think we've done enough?" Alexander asked, uncertainty clear in his voice. Olivia approached, taking his hands in hers. "We've done everything we could for now. Now we can only wait and see how our opponents will react." Alexander pulled her close, hugging her tightly. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "we're in this together." Olivia nodded against his chest, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. "Together," she repeated softly. That night, as the Thornton Mansion finally fell silent. The couple fell asleep in each other's arms, finding comfort in their newly discovered union. They knew that the following days would be crucial, that they would face challenges that would test not only their determination, but also their growing love. The game had entered its most dangerous phase, and the stakes had never been higher. But Alexander and Olivia were prepared to fight, for truth, for justice, and for the future they dreamed of building together. As the city slept, unaware of the battle unfolding in the shadows, the fate of empires and the course of history hung in the balance. And at the center of it all, an unlikely couple, united by extraordinary circumstances, ready to face the approaching storm. The dawn brought with it an atmosphere of palpable tension. Alexander and Olivia had barely slept, their senses on high, alert for any sign of imminent danger. Breakfast was a silent meal, interrupted only by the occasional sound of notifications on their cell phones. "We have a board meeting in 2 hours," Alexander reminded, his voice tense. "I'm sure my grandmother will try something there." Olivia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and concern. "We're prepared for this. Remember, we have allies on the board now. We're not alone." As they were preparing to leave, the butler hurriedly entered the dining room. "Sir, madam," he said, his voice trembling slightly, there are reporters at the mansion entrance, dozens of them." Alexander and Olivia exchanged alarmed looks before rushing to the front window. The butler wasn't exaggerating. A crowd of journalists, photographers, and TV cameras was clustered at the property gates. "How did they find out?" Alexander murmured, more to himself than to Olivia. "This has your grandmother's fingerprints all over it," Olivia responded, her tone bitter. "She's trying to destabilize us before the meeting." Alexander took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. "Well, if she wants a show, let's give her one." With a confidence he didn't fully feel, Alexander took Olivia's hand, and together they stepped out to face the press. The noise of shouted questions and flashing cameras was deafening. "Mr. Thornton, is it true that the New Tomorrow Foundation is a front to cover up irregularities in Thornton Corp? Mrs. Thornton, there are rumors that you're using insider information to manipulate the market. Can you comment?" Alexander raised his hands, asking for silence. Surprisingly, the crowd quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm, "the accusations that are circulating are unfounded and frankly offensive. The New Tomorrow Foundation was created with a single purpose: to bring more transparency and accountability to the corporate world." Olivia stepped forward, her posture confident. "We are committed to truth and integrity. That's why we've invited an independent audit not just of Thornton Corp, but of all major corporations in the country. We have nothing to hide." A young reporter stood out from the crowd. "And what about the allegations that you're using the foundation for a personal vendetta against Mrs. Constance Thornton?" Alexander felt Olivia squeeze his hand, a silent reminder to stay calm. "Our relationship with Mrs. Thornton is exactly what it has always been, respectful and professional. Any suggestion of family conflict is pure sensationalist speculation." After a few more skillfully deflected questions, the couple retreated, leaving behind a frustrated press, but without real ammunition to attack them. In the car on the way to Thornton Corp, Olivia finally let out a sigh of relief. "You were brilliant out there," she said, smiling at Alexander. He returned the smile, though his eyes remained worried. "We both were. But that was just the warm-up. The real challenge awaits us in that boardroom." When they arrived at the company headquarters, they were greeted by curious looks and whispers from employees. The tension in the air was almost palpable. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Alexander and Olivia found Mrs. Constance waiting for them with a cold smile. "What an admirable performance out there," she commented, her tone bordering on sarcasm. "You almost convinced me." "We weren't trying to convince you, Grandma," Alexander replied, keeping his voice low and controlled. "Just telling the truth." Mrs. Constance's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Truth is such a flexible concept, don't you think? Especially in the business world." Before anyone could respond, the boardroom doors opened and board members began to enter. Alexander noticed some familiar faces among them. allies they had recruited in recent weeks. But he also saw hostile expressions, people who were clearly on his grandmother's side. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but the underlying tension was palpable. Finally, Mrs. Constance took the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," she began, her voice laden with authority, "we are here today to discuss a serious matter. My grandson and his wife, in their impetuous youth, have made decisions that may jeopardize everything we've built." Alexander felt his blood boil, but maintained his composure. Olivia, at his side, remained impassive, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Constance. "The New Tomorrow Foundation," Mrs. Constance continued, "although noble in its stated intentions, represents a real danger to the stability of Thornton Corp and, by extension, to the entire market." Murmurs of agreement and disagreement ran through the room. Alexander seized the opportunity to intervene. "With all due respect, Grandma," he said, standing up, "the Foundation doesn't represent a danger, but an opportunity to lead by example, to show the world that Thornton Corp doesn't fear scrutiny because it has nothing to hide." Olivia also stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, think about the future. In an increasingly connected and transparent world, companies that refuse to adapt will be left behind. We're offering Thornton Corp the chance to be at the forefront of this change." The room erupted into heated discussions. Accusations were thrown, passionate defenses were made. For hours, the fate of Thornton Corp and the New Tomorrow Foundation hung in the balance. Finally, when it seemed that neither side would yield, one of the oldest board members asked for the floor. "Perhaps," he suggested, his voice tired, "we should consider a middle ground, allow the audit to proceed, but under controlled conditions, approved by this board." The suggestion was met with thoughtful silence. Mrs. Constance, realizing that a total victory was out of reach, nodded slowly. "Very well," she said, her tone resigned. "Let's vote on this proposal." The vote was close, but in the end, the proposal was approved by a narrow margin. Alexander and Olivia exchanged looks of cautious relief. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. When the meeting finally ended, Mrs. Constance approached the couple. Her face was impassive, but her eyes shone with a mixture of anger and respect. "You played well today," she said softly, "but don't delude yourselves. This is far from over." With those words, she walked away, leaving Alexander and Olivia alone in the emptied boardroom. "What do we do now?" Alexander asked, feeling the weight of the day fall on his shoulders. Olivia intertwined her fingers with his. "Now, my love, we prepare for the next battle, because you can be sure your grandmother won't give up easily." As they left the building under the curious gazes of employees and the incessant flashes of photographers still waiting for them, Alexander and Olivia knew they had won an important battle. But the war for the soul of Thornton Corp and for the truth about the past was far from over. The storm forming on the horizon promised to be fierce, but together they were determined to face it, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed the tumultuous board meeting were a test of endurance for Alexander and Olivia. The audit of Thornton Corp had begun, but under the watchful eye of a supervision team chosen by the board, a concession the couple had to accept to ensure the process moved forward. Meanwhile, the New Tomorrow Foundation was gaining momentum. Other companies, pressured by public opinion, began volunteering for similar audits. The movement for corporate transparency that Alexander and Olivia had initiated was expanding beyond their initial expectations. However, the peace was only superficial. Behind the scenes, a silent war was underway. Mrs. Constance, though seemingly cooperative in public, was moving her pieces with cunning. Alexander and Olivia's allies within the company began reporting subtle pressures, veiled threats, offers of promotion in exchange for loyalty. On a particularly tense evening, Alexander and Olivia were reviewing some documents in the mansion's study when the phone rang. It was James Carter, the prosecutor they had trusted. "Alexander," James's voice sounded urgent and a little frightened. "I've got it. I have the evidence you needed about the Ramirez case." Alexander's heart raced. "Are you sure, James? This changes everything." "Absolutely," James replied. "But listen, it's not safe to talk on the phone. I need to meet you in person, tomorrow at the Central Park at noon." After hanging up, Alexander turned to Olivia, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "He got it, Olivia. The evidence that will clear your father's name," Olivia covered her mouth with her hands, tears forming in her eyes. After so long, finally. They embraced, the moment laden with emotion. But the joy was brief. "We need to be careful," Alexander said, pulling away slightly. "If James really has this evidence, he's in danger, and so are we." Olivia nodded, regaining her composure. "You're right. We need a plan." They spent the night planning, considering all possible angles. When the sun rose, they were exhausted but prepared. The meeting in the park was tense. Alexander and Olivia arrived separately, blending in with the crowd of people enjoying the sunny day. James appeared punctually, looking nervous and constantly looking over his shoulder. "Here," he said quickly, handing Alexander a flash drive. "It's all there. Documents, emails, recordings, everything that proves Mrs. Constance's involvement and others in the fall of the Ramirez family." Olivia took the flash drive with trembling hands. "James, I don't know how to thank you." But before she could finish, a sharp sound cut through the air. James staggered forward, a shocked expression on his face. Alexander caught him before he fell, noticing with horror the red stain spreading on his back. "Help!" Olivia shouted as Alexander tried to stop the bleeding. "Someone call an ambulance!" Chaos ensued in the park. People were running in all directions, screams echoing in the air. Amidst the confusion, Alexander saw a figure quickly moving away, something shiny, a gun, disappearing under a coat. Minutes later, which seemed like hours, the ambulance sirens could be heard. The paramedics arrived, pushing Alexander and Olivia aside to attend to James. "Will he be all right?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. The paramedic shook his head, his expression grave. "We'll do our best, ma'am, but the situation is critical." As the ambulance departed, Alexander and Olivia found themselves surrounded by police officers, bombarded with questions. The flash drive weighed like lead in Olivia's pocket. Hours later, exhausted and shaken, they finally managed to return to the mansion. The news wasn't good. James was in critical condition, fighting for his life in the ICU. "This was a message," Alexander said, his voice laden with anger and guilt. "They know we have the evidence now." Olivia, sitting on the edge of the bed, stared fixedly at the flash drive in her hands. "We can't back down now, Alexander, not after what happened to James." Alexander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I know, but we need to be more careful than ever. Whoever did this to James won't hesitate to come after us." At that moment, a knock on the door startled them. It was the butler, looking disturbed. "Sir, madam," he said hesitantly, "Mrs. Thornton is here. She insists on speaking with you." Alexander and Olivia exchanged alarmed looks. Mrs. Constance's presence, especially after the day's events, couldn't be a coincidence. "Tell her we'll be down in a moment," Alexander replied, his voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. When the butler left, Olivia quickly hid the flash drive in a secret compartment they had installed in the room. "Remember," Alexander said, holding Olivia's face between his hands, "no matter what she says or does, we're in this together." Olivia nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "Together," she repeated. Hand in hand, they descended the stairs, preparing to face Mrs. Constance and possibly the beginning of a battle that would change their lives forever. The Thornton matriarch awaited them in the living room, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her cold eyes. "My dears," she said, her voice soft but with a steely edge. "What a terrible day you've had. I came as soon as I heard about the incident in the park." Alexander felt Olivia squeeze his hand, a silent warning to stay calm. "Thank you for your concern, Grandma," he responded, keeping his tone neutral. "It was a shock for all of us." Mrs. Constance studied them for a long moment before speaking again. "You know, of course, that this changes everything. The situation has become too dangerous. Perhaps it's time to reconsider this crusade of yours." Olivia stepped forward, her eyes shining with a mixture of pain and determination. "With all due respect, Mrs. Thornton, what happened today only reinforces the importance of what we're doing. People are willing to kill to keep secrets buried. We can't back down now." Mrs. Constance's expression hardened. "You are young, idealistic. You don't understand the forces you're playing with. There are things in motion that go beyond Thornton Corp., beyond even the fall of the Ramirez family." Alexander felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean, Grandma?" For a moment, something like remorse passed through Mrs. Constance's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by her usual steel determination. "I'm saying that you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path and risk losing everything, not just the company, but your lives. Or you can stop now, while there's still time." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken implications. Alexander and Olivia exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Alexander turned to his grandmother. "We appreciate your concern, Grandma, but our decision is made. We're going to see this through to the end, no matter the consequences." Mrs. Constance studied them for a long moment, her face an indecipherable mask. Then, slowly, she stood up. "Very well," she said, her voice cold as ice. "You've chosen your path. Don't say I didn't warn you." With those words, she left, leaving behind a silence laden with tension and anticipation. Alexander pulled Olivia into a tight embrace, feeling the tremor in her body. "We're doing the right thing," he murmured against her hair. Olivia nodded against his chest. "I know, but I'm afraid, Alexander. What did she mean by forces beyond Thornton Corp? What else are we about to uncover?" Alexander had no answer for that. He just hugged Olivia tighter, knowing that regardless of what the future held, they would face it together. Outside, night was falling over the city, bringing with it the promise of turbulent days ahead. The battle for truth and justice was about to enter its most dangerous phase, and Alexander and Olivia were at the center of the storm. The days that followed Mrs. Constance's visit were marked by growing tension. Alexander and Olivia knew they were walking on a thin line, with powerful enemies lurking in the shadows. The news about James Carter's condition was not encouraging. He remained in a coma, fighting for his life, and the doctors were cautious in their prognoses. The police were investigating the attack, but Alexander and Olivia had little hope that the truth would come to light through official means. Meanwhile, the couple pored over the contents of the flash drive, unraveling a web of corruption and collusion that went far beyond their initial expectations. It wasn't just the fall of the Ramirez family that was documented there, but a series of illegal maneuvers involving high-ranking politicians, judges, and even international figures. "This is much bigger than we imagined, Alexander," Olivia said. One night, her voice trembling slightly as she read yet another incriminating email. "No wonder they're willing to kill to keep this secret." Alexander nodded grimly, massaging his temples. "The question is, how do we use this information without putting ourselves directly in the line of fire?" They spent hours discussing strategies, weighing the risks and benefits of each course of action. Finally, they decided that the best approach would be to disseminate the information gradually through multiple channels. "We need to create a safety net," Olivia suggested. "Distribute copies of the evidence to trusted people, with instructions to release them if something happens to us." Alexander agreed, although the idea that their lives were in real danger made him nauseous. "We also need to think about an emergency exit, a plan B in case things get really bad." In the following days, they carefully selected trusted allies, investigative journalists, human rights lawyers, even some opposition politicians who had a reputation for integrity. Each received a piece of the puzzle, with specific instructions on when and how to act. Meanwhile, at Thornton Corp, the atmosphere was one of palpable tension. Employees whispered in the corridors, casting nervous glances at Alexander and Olivia whenever they appeared. The audit continued, but it was clear there was resistance at all levels. A particularly stressful afternoon. Alexander was surprised by an unexpected visit to his office. It was Robert, the company's CFO, a man who had always been loyal to Mrs. Constance. "Alexander," Robert said, closing the door behind him and speaking in a low voice, "I need to talk to you. In private." Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Alexander motioned for him to sit down. "What's going on, Robert?" The CFO looked nervous, his eyes constantly turning to the door as if he feared being overheard. "It's about the audit and other things. I can't stay silent anymore." Alexander felt his heart race. Could it be possible they were about to gain an unexpected ally? Robert continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "For years I've known things that shouldn't happen in a respectable company, but I always convinced myself it was for the greater good, for the success of Thornton Corp." "What kind of things, Robert?" Alexander asked softly, trying not to frighten the clearly disturbed man. "Bribes, market manipulation, even blackmail," Robert replied, running a hand over his tired face. "Your grandmother, she's ruthless, Alexander. She'll do anything to maintain control." Alexander nodded slowly, his mind racing with the implications. "Why are you telling me this now?" Robert raised his eyes, and Alexander saw in them a mixture of fear and determination. "Because what happened to Prosecutor Carter, that was a point of no return. I can't be complicit in this anymore." Before Alexander could respond, the office door opened abruptly. Olivia entered, her face pale with concern. "Alexander, we have a problem," she said, before noticing Robert and stopping abruptly. Alexander made a reassuring gesture. "It's okay, Olivia. Robert was just offering us his help." Olivia looked from one to the other, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Well, then maybe he can help us with this too," she said, extending her tablet. On the screen, a flashy headline screamed, "Scandal at Thornton Corp. Heir accused of fraud." Alexander felt the blood freeze in his veins. "What? This is ridiculous." Olivia nodded grimly. "It's a setup, obviously, but the story is spreading like wildfire. All the major media outlets are reporting it." Robert visibly paled. "My God, she's really playing all her cards now." Alexander stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "Robert, we need your help. Do you have access to information that can prove my innocence?" The CFO hesitated for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I do, and more than that. I can prove Mrs. Constance's involvement in a series of illegal activities." "Great," Alexander said, his voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. "Here's what we're going to do." The following hours were a frenzy of activity. While Robert collected documents and transferred files, Alexander and Olivia activated their network of allies. Journalists were alerted, lawyers summoned, and the New Tomorrow Foundation's public relations team was mobilized to prepare a response to the accusations. In the midst of this chaos, Olivia's phone rang. It was from the hospital. James woke up, she told Alexander, tears of relief in her eyes. "He's weak, but conscious, and he wants to talk to us." Alexander felt a wave of hope. "Go," he said to Olivia. "Find out what he has to say. I'll continue here with Robert." Olivia hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to leave you alone at this moment." Alexander pulled her in for a quick hug. "I'm safe here, and the information James has could be crucial. Go, but be careful." With one last worried look, Olivia departed. Alexander turned to Robert, who was still working furiously on his computer. "How are we doing?" Alexander asked. Robert looked at him, a slight smile on his tired face. "Almost there. A few more minutes and we'll have everything we need to unmask this farce and expose the truth." At that moment, the office lights flickered and went out. Robert's computer screen went black. "No!" Robert shouted, typing frantically. "No, no, no!" Alexander ran to the window. Outside, the rest of the city was still lit. It was only the Thornton Corp building that was in darkness. "This is not a coincidence," he murmured. As if to confirm his suspicions, the office door opened. Mrs. Constance entered, flanked by two men in suits that Alexander didn't recognize. "Ah, Alexander," she said, her voice cold as ice. "It seems we have much to discuss." Alexander straightened up, facing his grandmother's gaze. He knew this moment would eventually come. The real battle was about to begin. "Yes, Grandma," he replied, his voice firm despite the fear that threatened to consume him. "I think we do indeed." The air in the office was charged with tension. Alexander could feel Robert trembling beside him, but he stood firm. Whatever Mrs. Constance's plan was, he wouldn't yield without a fight. The night had only just begun, and the fate of Thornton Corp, and perhaps much more, hung in the balance. The office of Alexander, once a symbol of power and prestige, now felt like a trap. The shadows cast by the emergency lighting danced on the walls, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Mrs. Constance advanced, her heels echoing in the tense silence. "You've disappointed me deeply, Alexander," she said, her voice laden with a mixture of anger and sadness. "I expected you to understand what's at stake here." Alexander stood firm, though his heart was racing furiously. "What's at stake is the truth, Grandma, and justice." Mrs. Constance let out a bitter laugh. "Truth? Justice? Pretty words, my dear, but the real world doesn't work that way. Do you think I built this empire by being fair?" Robert, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "Mrs. Thornton, please, we've already gone too far. Maybe it's time to—" "Silence!" she interrupted him sharply. "You've done enough damage, Robert. Your loyalty will be remembered." The threatening tone in her voice made Robert retreat, visibly, paling. Alexander seized the moment to try to reason with his grandmother. "Grandma, think carefully. The evidence we have, and there's no way to cover this up. It's bigger than all of us." For a brief instant, something akin to doubt passed across Mrs. Constance's face, but it was quickly replaced by her usual mask of determination. "Evidence?" she said, a cold smile forming on her lips. "You mean the files on Robert's computer? Or perhaps the flash drive your dear wife hid so carefully?" Alexander felt a chill down his spine. How did she know? As if reading his thoughts, Mrs. Constance continued, "Oh, my dear grandson, did you really think I wouldn't be prepared? That I wouldn't have eyes and ears everywhere?" She gestured to one of the men accompanying her. He stepped forward, holding an electronic device. "At this moment, all the data in your office is being erased, and as for the flash drive..." The other man showed something that made Alexander's heart sink. The very flash drive that James had given them. "How?" Alexander began, but was interrupted by the sound of his cell phone. It was a message from Olivia. "Trap at the hospital. James gone. I'm okay, but being followed. Be careful." Alexander struggled to maintain his composure, but Mrs. Constance noticed his agitation. "Ah, news from your lovely wife?" she asked, her tone falsely sweet. "I hope she's well. It would be a shame if something happened to her, wouldn't it?" The veiled threat made Alexander's blood boil. "If you touch a hair on her head..." "You'll do what exactly?" Mrs. Constance interrupted him. "Let's be practical, Alexander. You've lost. The evidence is in my possession. Your reputation is in tatters thanks to the fraud accusations, and your precious foundation will soon be seen as nothing more than a front for illegal activities." Alexander felt the weight of defeat beginning to bear down on him. He had underestimated his grandmother's influence and reach, but then a thought struck him. "You may have the physical evidence," he said slowly, "but what about the copies we distributed to our allies?" For the first time, Mrs. Constance seemed genuinely surprised. "What?" Alexander continued, gaining confidence. "Journalists, lawyers, politicians, dozens of people have parts of the puzzle. If anything happens to us, everything will come to light." Robert, who had been observing the confrontation in silence, let out an audible sigh of relief. Mrs. Constance, on the other hand, seemed to be rapidly reassessing the situation. "You're bluffing," she said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Want to risk it?" Alexander challenged. "Because I guarantee, Grandma, if you go ahead with this plan, there's no turning back. Everything you've built will crumble." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with tension. Mrs. Constance stared fixedly at Alexander, as if seeing him for the first time. At that moment, the office lights flickered and came back to life. Robert's computer hummed, restarting. "What's happening?" one of Mrs. Constance's men asked, confused. As if in response, the office door opened abruptly. Olivia entered, accompanied by a group of people Alexander recognized as members of the company's IT team. "Sorry for the delay, darling," Olivia said, a triumphant smile on her face. "We had to make a little detour to ensure our backups were safe." Mrs. Constance looked from Olivia to Alexander, her expression a mixture of shock and respect. "How?" she began, but Olivia interrupted her. "Oh, it wasn't hard to predict that you'd try something like this, Mrs. Thornton. That's why we took extra precautions. Each attempt to erase our data only activated more backups on secure servers." Alexander couldn't contain a smile of pride. Olivia had thought of everything. "And what about James?" he asked, concerned. "He's safe," Olivia replied. "The escape from the hospital was staged. He's under police protection now, ready to testify." Mrs. Constance seemed to have aged years in the last few minutes. She leaned heavily on a nearby chair. "It's over, isn't it?" she said, her voice surprisingly calm. Alexander exchanged a look with Olivia before responding. "It doesn't have to end in disgrace, Grandma. We can still do this the right way. Clear the company's name, compensate those who were harmed." Mrs. Constance stared at him for a long time, as if pondering her options. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You've won, Alexander," she said, a touch of pride in her voice. "You proved to be more astute than I imagined. Perhaps Thornton Corp is in good hands after all." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers were called, statements prepared, and a long night of negotiations began. The battle was far from over, but the tide had definitely turned. As the sun rose over the city, Alexander and Olivia finally had a moment alone. Exhausted, but triumphant, they embraced. "We did it," Olivia whispered. "Thanks to you," Alexander replied, kissing her softly. "Your intelligence, your courage, I couldn't have done it without you." Olivia smiled, tears of relief and happiness in her eyes. "We're a team, remember? Together we can face anything." As they watched the sunrise through the office window, Alexander felt a mixture of emotions: relief, pride, but also apprehension for what was to come. The battle for the soul of Thornton Corp had been won, but the war for transparency and integrity in the corporate world was just beginning. But with Olivia by his side, Alexander knew they were ready to face any challenge. The future, though uncertain, seemed brighter than ever. The days that followed the confrontation in Alexander's office were a whirlwind of frantic activities. The news of Mrs. Constance's attempted cover-up and the subsequent turnaround, led by Alexander and Olivia, leaked to the press, creating an unprecedented media frenzy. Thornton Corp found itself at the center of a storm, with reporters camped day and night in front of the company headquarters. Alexander and Olivia, now seen as the unlikely heroes of this saga, were constantly sought after for interviews and statements. On a particularly hectic morning, Alexander found Olivia in the main conference room, surrounded by a team of lawyers and press advisors. "How are we doing?" he asked, noticing the dark circles under his wife's eyes, a reflection of his own sleepless nights. Olivia offered him a tired but determined smile. "Surviving. We just finalized the official press release. We're going to announce a complete and independent audit, as well as a compensation program for all those affected by the company's past practices." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "And what about Grandma?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew that Mrs. Constance's fate was a delicate and complex issue. "She's agreed to completely step away from the company," Olivia replied softly. "In exchange, we won't press for criminal charges. She'll be under house arrest while investigations continue." Alexander felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, Mrs. Constance was still his grandmother, the woman who had raised him. "It's the best we can do given the circumstances," he agreed. The following weeks were a test of endurance for the couple. As they navigated the turbulent waters of public opinion and ongoing investigations, Alexander and Olivia also had to deal with the internal restructuring of Thornton Corp. Many high-ranking executives, fearing being implicated in past scandals, resigned. Others were removed as new evidence of misconduct came to light. The task of rebuilding the company's leadership from scratch was monumental. Amidst all this chaos, Alexander and Olivia found an unexpected ally in Robert, the former CFO. Remorseful of his role in past schemes, he offered to fully cooperate with the investigations and help with the transition. "You two gave me a second chance," Robert said during a meeting. "I want to use this opportunity to do things the right way this time." His experience and insider knowledge proved invaluable in the months that followed. As the dust began to settle, Alexander and Olivia could finally turn their attention back to the New Tomorrow Foundation. What had begun as a front for their investigations had transformed into a symbol of hope for many. "We have a unique opportunity here," Olivia said one night as they discussed future plans. "We can use the foundation to really make a difference, to promote transparency and ethics in business on a global scale." Alexander smiled, feeling a wave of pride and love for his wife. "You're right, and I think I know where we can start." In the months that followed, the New Tomorrow Foundation launched a series of pioneering initiatives. Financial education programs for underprivileged communities, scholarships for promising young people from low-income families, and a support fund for ethical small business owners were just the beginning. Thornton Corp, under Alexander and Olivia's new leadership, became a model of corporate transparency. Every important decision was openly communicated to shareholders and the public. The company implemented rigorous ethics and compliance policies, often going beyond what was required by law. Naturally, not everything was perfect. There was resistance from more conservative sectors of the market, accusations that the new policies were hurting profits. But Alexander and Olivia remained firm in their vision. "We're building something for the long term," Alexander said during a tense shareholders meeting. "A sustainable business isn't based just on quarterly profits, but on trust, integrity, and real value for society." Gradually, their approach began to bear fruit. Thornton Corp's reputation improved significantly. New talents attracted by the company's ethical culture joined the team. Partnerships with prestigious organizations were established. Amidst all this professional transformation, Alexander and Olivia also experienced a profound personal change. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a true partnership, based on mutual respect, admiration, and a love that grew every day. One night, almost a year after the events that changed their lives, the couple was relaxing at home after a long day of work. "Have you ever thought," Olivia began, nestled in Alexander's arms, "about how everything could have been different if I hadn't decided to seek revenge, if you hadn't chosen to listen to me?" Alexander reflected for a moment before answering. "Sometimes. But then I look at everything we've accomplished together, at the difference we're making, and I can't imagine any other path." Olivia smiled, turning to face him. "You know, when I planned this whole marriage scheme, the last thing I expected was to actually fall in love." Alexander laughed softly, pulling her closer. "And I never imagined that my mysterious bride would become not only my business partner, but the love of my life." They kissed, a kiss full of promises for the future. That night, as the city slept outside, Alexander and Olivia made plans. Plans for the company, for the foundation, for their life together. The path ahead was still full of challenges, but they knew that together they could face anything. Their story, of an arranged marriage that transformed into a powerful partnership, of a quest for revenge that became a mission for justice, was a testimony to the power of truth, courage, and true love. And so, as a new day approached, Alexander and Olivia Thornton were ready to write the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. Not just as business leaders, but as a couple united by a common purpose and an unshakable love. 2 years had passed since the tumultuous transformation of Thornton Corp. Alexander and Olivia had managed to stabilize the company and rebuild its reputation, but new challenges loomed on the horizon. On a sunny spring morning, the couple arrived early at the company headquarters. The buzz in the corridors was more intense than usual. "What's going on?" Alexander asked his assistant, noticing the commotion. "Mr. Thornton, Global Tech just announced a hostile takeover bid for our green technology subsidiary," she responded, handing him a tablet with the news. Olivia, who was at his side, frowned as she read the headline. "They're offering a 30% premium over the market value. That's going to attract a lot of shareholders." Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Call an emergency board meeting. We need to discuss this immediately." The following hours were a whirlwind of meetings and conference calls. Global Tech, a multinational giant known for its aggressive business practices, had chosen the perfect moment for its attack. Thornton Corp's green technology division was on the rise, with several promising patents in development. "We can't let this happen," Olivia said during the board meeting. "Our green technology division isn't just a financial asset. It's the heart of Thornton Corp's new ethical direction." Some board members looked skeptical. "But the premium they're offering—" "It's hard to ignore," one of them argued. Alexander stood up, his voice firm and passionate. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand the temptation, but I ask you to consider what we've built over the last 2 years. This isn't just about profits, but purpose. Our green technology has the potential to make a real difference in the world. Are we really going to hand that over to a company known for prioritizing profits above all else?" The debate extended for hours, with heated arguments on both sides. In the end, the board decided, by a narrow margin, to reject Global Tech's offer. But the battle was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Global Tech intensified its efforts, trying to convince shareholders to accept the offer directly. Alexander and Olivia found themselves working day and night to defend the company they had worked so hard to reform. They organized meetings with shareholders, gave press interviews, and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to secure support. The stress began to take its toll. One night, Alexander found Olivia in the home office, looking exhausted. "Hey," he said softly, massaging her tense shoulders. "You need to rest a bit," Olivia sighed, leaning back into his touch. "I know, but there's so much at stake. If we lose this battle—" "We're not going to lose," Alexander gently interrupted her. "Remember what we faced 2 years ago. This is just another challenge, and we'll overcome it together." Olivia smiled, turning to face him. "What would I do without you?" "Probably sleep more," Alexander joked, making her laugh. That night, as they were having dinner, an idea began to form in Olivia's mind. "What if," she began hesitantly, "instead of just defending ourselves, we counter-attacked?" Alexander raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "Global Tech wants our green technology, right? But what if we offered something they can't buy? A partnership with other ethical companies, an alliance to develop sustainable technologies on a global scale." Alexander's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Olivia, that's brilliant. We could use the New Tomorrow Foundation as a platform." They spent the rest of the night elaborating on the plan, energized by this new possibility. In the days that followed, Alexander and Olivia worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They contacted other companies committed to ethical practices and sustainability, proposing an unprecedented alliance. The idea caught fire. Companies from around the world, inspired by Thornton Corp's vision, joined the initiative. What began as a defensive strategy transformed into a global movement for more ethical and sustainable business. Global Tech, caught off guard by this turn of events, saw its hostile offer quickly lose strength. Thornton Corp's shareholders, excited about the company's new direction, massively rejected the acquisition proposal. In a historic press conference, Alexander and Olivia announced the formation of the Global Green Alliance, a consortium of companies committed to ethical and sustainable innovation. "Today, we're not just defending a company," Alexander declared, his voice full of emotion. "We're proposing a new way of doing business, a way that puts people and the planet on the same level as profits." Olivia, at his side, added, This is just the beginning. We invite other companies, big and small, to join us on this journey. Together, we can create a brighter and more sustainable future for everyone. The key. Response was overwhelming. Messages of support flooded social media. World leaders praised the initiative, and even some of Thornton Corp's fiercest critics were forced to acknowledge the positive impact of their actions. That night, after the frenzy of the press conference and countless interviews, Alexander and Olivia finally had a moment alone. "We really did it, didn't we?" Olivia said, her voice mixing disbelief and joy. Alexander pulled her into a tight embrace. "Yes, we did. And this is just the beginning." As they watched the sunset from their office window, both reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. From an arranged marriage to life and business partners, from a quest for revenge to leaders of a global movement for positive change. "You know," Alexander said softly, "I think it's time we thought about expanding our family." Olivia looked at him surprised before a radiant smile lit up her face. "You mean—" "Yes," Alexander confirmed, kissing her softly. "I think we're ready for our next big challenge, parenthood." As they kissed, with the city stretching out below them and a future full of possibilities ahead, Alexander and Olivia knew that no matter what came, they would face it together. Their love story, born from the most unlikely circumstances, continued to unfold in ways they could never have imagined. And so, with hearts full of love and minds focused on a better future, they prepared for the next chapter of their extraordinary journey.